right, everybody, we've got another special podcast ahead. This is the second episode where we've been lucky enough to have Mr. Pat Nolan on the show with us. Pat, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
I'm
It's not every
glad
place I go that I get invited back.
Usually I don't. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm really excited about this episode. We're going to kind of name it Training and Drive. And I think what we're going to focus on is collar conditioning, which is a touchy subject for a lot of people. You know, there's plenty of folks that are afraid of using the e-collar, quote unquote, don't want to ruin their dog. A lot of misconceptions about the collar. And you have a nuance that is different than how I do it. And so I am all ears on this episode to see how I can incorporate the ways that you do it to tweak the behaviors and attitudes of the dogs that I work with to make it more fun. That's why we're out here doing it. Yeah. So maybe describe to everybody what training and drive means.
Okay. We have very sophisticated animals, the retrievers. In one level, they're very sophisticated, selectively bred for many generations to work with people. But at a deeper level, they're really just primitive creatures in their brain. They have a primitive predatory brain. It's hardwired to help the animal survive. And they're all the time seeking prey. They're seeking to fit in with the pack or their family, and they're seeking to avoid danger. So it boils down to two basic motivations for everything that the dog does. Every time they move, they're trying to seek comfort. They're trying to make something good or desirable happen, or avoid something unpleasant and make something unpleasant stop. Once they learn how to make it stop, they can avoid it in the future. So the animal is highly focused on these things. It's very deep and genetic. How can I make something good happen? How can I avoid this dangerous situation? And I don't mean that it's physically dangerous, but at a genetic level, they need to avoid discomfort. And when we want to motivate performance in the animal, obedience to command, if we can elicit the behavior with just positive reinforcement. When you go, you'll find a bumper. We can elicit it with just pressure. When you go, you will avoid discomfort. You can stop the collar. There's some problems with doing it with just one or the other. If we're only using positive reinforcement, say if I'm going to use treats, I want to teach him to sit and I give him a treat. I mean, he's not always hungry. And if I have treats and Bob is swinging a bumper, my adult dog doesn't care for treats. He wants the bumpers. And if Bob's swinging bumpers and Kevin's shooting flyers, Bob doesn't have his attention anymore. He's chasing Kevin now.
That's right.
So if the dog's the king of the world, if we only use positive reinforcement, adding something to draw out the behavior from the dog, if we only use the desire to avoid pressure, the situation does arise at some point when they understand you can't put pressure on me when your battery's dead, when I'm outside the range, when you're in the competition. So if he learns in this special situation, you can't put pressures on me, and the only reason they're responding when you tell them is to avoid pressure, the behavior goes away. So I want to appeal to both motivators and to this deep genetic, I want to draw out from the dog this drive that he has to seek prey. So I want to connect everything I ask him to do with making a retrieve happen or making food happen initially and then making a retrieve happen. Plus, before I think he's really fully trained on the behaviors, is I want him to know he can turn off pressure by coming when I call him, sitting when I tell him, go when I send you, get in the water. So he can turn pressure off. And when he understands how to turn it off, he knows how to avoid it. Mm-hmm. So I think we get a stronger behavior when we appeal to both.
I do too. I have it written down and I feel like now is not the time, but not every dog is created equal. And so when I want everyone to that's listening to think about that there are some dogs that one of those appeals more to them than the other. They
Sure.
could care less about a correction and can handle more. Other dogs, a slight correction or just a change in the tone of your voice can affect them, which then can in turn affect the drive. And so there's a balancing act that no dog is created equal. And so I do want to double back on that and have that be a good discussion between the two of us, because realistically, when you have 20 to 30 of them and you pull them out, you can't treat them all the same.
Now,
Oh
now,
no,
when you
yeah.
say sorry, but when you say like not created equal, do you mean more like not motivated? Like they're all unique, so they respond to different motivations in a unique manner.
I mean, that as well as some are smarter than others.
Gotcha.
Some are uh, don't care about a bumper, but if it's a duck, like there's just some hate the water because they had really negative experiences with it. And so they, no matter how much you work them in it, their water attitude is not as good. I mean, it's just, we could go make a huge list of what makes a great dog great and what makes a mediocre dog mediocre. But the goal, no matter what, is to make the mediocre dog as best as it can be, and that great dog even more great.
Want to maximize the genetic gifting of the individual dog. We want to get the best we can out of this animal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at a again at a very basic level. The animal is focused on the signals that predict the availability of the reward, the signals that predict that pressure is available, or pressure, he can avoid pressure by responding appropriately there. And that attention and focus on those signals, if it speeds the learning if we directly connect, if we're clear in the communication and we clearly signal to the animal. When there's any confusion, the training breaks down because he doesn't know how to get what he wants. And at some level, when your animal really wants something, and they want something or we wouldn't own them, right? I mean, you
Right.
want the retriever, you're training a performance animal. If they really are not interested in retrieving, at some point, maybe this dog is better suited to another job in life, But if your dog really wants something and we don't connect what he wants with the things we're asking him to do, I believe at some level, they think everything we're asking them to do is preventing him from getting what he wants. He says, I want to retrieve. You say, come here. He says, no, 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 no. I want to retrieve. Sit. No, no, no. I want to retrieve. Go over there. No, I want to retrieve.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't directly connect what we're asking him to do with the pursuit of the retrieve, I think they perceive it as we're trying to prevent them from getting the retrieve. And there's a lot of conflict there for the animal because that's not what he wants. He wants the bird. He wants to go.
Right. I feel like those are moments though where I would equate it to the light bulb moments where you can see that inner struggle. And this is maybe where you can describe how you eliminate what I'm dealing with or shorten the learning curve. But I always, while trying to maintain a high attitude through repetition, that light bulb goes off of, if I do this, the faster I do this, the faster I get the retrieve. If we're working on T pattern and I'm trying to get a right back and he wants to go to the right over, all of a sudden the light bulb clicks and he gets the retrieve he's fixated on the over pile, but I finally get that back cast and he gets his retrieve and he goes, oh, I got it. Now all of a sudden we're cool with that. But there's always those moments where you have to fight through it is the wrong term, but you have to move through the process until that dog clicks. And so do you find that through training and driving, what we're about to discuss, you find light bulbs going off way faster?
Faster. I've trained dogs for a long time. I've trained dogs to handle without an e-collar, tennis shoes and a long line, run out in the field and get hold of them. and jump in the pond and swim. Even with e-collars, I've spent time in water chasing dogs. I'm sure you have too. But if we can break those things down, there are skills that we can train into our animal, into our dog, that help him understand, hey, I have what you want. I want you to have it. Let me show you how to get it. So we can teach him early on. You want the bumper? Go over here to get the bumper. So he can, I call that the indirect path to reward. He wants the bumper at 9 o'clock. Hey, you want that bumper? Sit and go over there. And then you can connect his pursuit with that bumper by going the other way. I use reward markers to do that. Any behavior that is consistently connected to the retrieve, the behavior becomes rewarding. And I think we have some on some of the videos, I think I can point out sometimes where some unusual behavior or it's just, at least it's not a genetically predisposed behavior for the dog, it has become rewarding to them.
Very cool. So let's talk again a little bit about the terminology that you're using so that everybody understands it. Training and drive basically means you're connecting the dots and training this dog while it's in a super high state of mind, learning how to get what it wants, whether that being food as a puppy or retrieves a bumper or a duck as it progresses.
Yes, I think that's a pretty good description. I'm trying to use the dog's internal drive for that retrieve, for the bird or food, to draw out, to connect that internal drive, to express that through the behavior that I want. So I want you to go to the table. I can use the tables early on. We'll explain why, but I want you to go to the table to make a retrieve happen. I want you to come when I call you to make a retrieve happen. Sit when I tell you to make a retrieve happen. When each behavior's been connected to the pursuit of the retrieve, it's easier to draw them from the behaviors from them. You say, there's years ago, there was a book, this Fetch and Carry. It was by Bernard Waters, and you may have heard of it, and you can find copies on it sometimes online, and there's some modern reproductions of it. But in there, he gives what I think is the best description of training and drive that I've heard, where he says, I think this is a pretty close to an exact quote. Much of what we ask of the dog in training is mere drudgery. Yet that dog will expend endless energy in pursuit of game. His best work comes when we so seamlessly blend the two that he cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. So his best obedience to command comes when he believes it's all pursuit of the prey. We need to connect that for him, make those connections.
Absolutely. Another term that you used is your markers. So can you describe, and we'll see it when we pair the video. And by the way, everybody, this is a first attempt ever with Pat. So we hope it goes good. He provided several videos that we're going to basically share screen on our Zoom meeting. And Pat's going to walk us through what we're watching, and you're going to be able to visualize this on YouTube. And so if you're tuning in your car and you're listening to what we're about to go over in the videos, you can go to the YouTube channel and watch, this segment of the podcast to see what Pat is talking about and move through it. But back to the markers. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Okay. A marker is a term that refers to, the scientists might call it a conditioned secondary reinforcer. So by condition, it means it's trained. So Pavlov's dog, they talk about, we've all heard about the Russian scientist Pavlov's dog, that the dog salivates. So what he found was, in his kennel, they were working on digestion, actually, I think, and they would put food in the dog's mouth, and they could count how much he salivated, how many drips of saliva came down. And they would do different things and see how that changed. But he noticed that once the dogs understood the guy coming with the food bowl meant dinner was coming, they'd start salivating when he see the guy coming with the food bowl. But then he saw that when the door opened and they'd heard the sound that they were preparing the food, they would start salivating when the door opened. And it just kept backing up further and further away. And the actual salivation started at many different steps before they saw the food.
Mhm.
So they started playing with that. And if you take a kennel full of dogs and you ring a bell, unless they've had some bad experience or good experience, it's just nothing to them. Just, it's like a bird in the background. Doesn't mean anything. But if you ring the bell and give him his dinner bowl, ring the bell and give him his dinner bowl. After a few repetitions, when you ring the bell, he starts to salivate. That's a conditioned response. His body responds to the sound of the bell like it does to the food. And which is pretty weird to me. I mean,
Right.
They don't eat sound, they don't eat bells, but their body is getting ready to digest food when it hears the bell. So if I use a clicker or a whistle, I don't use the clickers much. I use it for some small little trick things, but I use whistles or a verbal marker. Okay. Not the sit whistle. It's a different type of whistle. I use a silent whistle tuned so I can hear it.
Mhm.
And excuse me.
You're
I'll have to
okay.
fix that one in post. I use a silent whistle that's tuned so I can hear it. And I pair that with something the dog likes. So I blow the whistle and I give him a treat. I blow the whistle and I give him a treat. Soon, when I blow the whistle, the pup jumps around. Where's that treat coming from? And he's responding to the sound the way he would to the treat. When the retrieve becomes very important to him, I use my reward marker, which is the conditioned signal that the reward is coming.
Mhm.
So I blow the whistle and then throw the bumper. Now, when I blow the whistle, he's, oh, here comes my bumper. The way that helps us in training, if the dog is sitting right by my side, I say sit, he sits, I can give him a treat or I can hand him the bumper. But in the absence of the reward marker, if he runs out and goes to the table, if I want to use the bumper to reward him for going to the table, if without a reward marker, he goes to the table, now he looks at me and I bring the bumper out and he runs off the table. What he's actually getting rewarded for is watching me and running off the table.
Right.
But if he jumps on the table and I use a conditioned secondary reinforcer, and it's a terminal signal because he can quit what he's doing and pursue the reward, he has a big explosion in his brain of these pleasure chemicals when he hears the reward marker, almost as strong as if he just grabbed the bumper.
Mhm.
So he jumps on the table, tweet, boom, he gets big reinforcement for getting on the table, and then he can run back and pick up the bumper. So that's how the reward marker helps us use positive reinforcement at a distance with the dog.
Very good. Very good.
Ties in? Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. Yeah. I do have questions as we move on, but I think we should, at this point, let's jump into the videos.
Great.
Because I think a lot of my stuff is going to come amongst it. So,
Great.
Kevin is sharing his screen, everyone. So remember, as we're doing this and you want to actually tune into the video portion, you're going to hop on our YouTube channel, Lone Duck Outfitters on YouTube, and you're going to be able to watch us share a screen, watching Pat train his dog. So Pat, can you, before we hit play, give a quick overview of what we're working on?
Yeah, this is a dog that's, I think he's 11 months old in this video clip. And he loves to retrieve. He's been force trained to fetch. He's been forced on here and sit and back. He's been forced to go to the kennels. And he is, I made the video to kind of share and show, this was a number of years ago, that the dog is in drive state. He really wants the bumpers, but yet he's under control and not under duress. There's a lot of reward available to him, but he lets me pick out which one he's going to get. And he lets me direct him in a fairly highly distracting situation. It's not perfect obedience, but there's some nice things going on. We'll take a look. Now, he is wearing a collar, and I first force only once. He drops a bumper on delivery, and that's a disobedience. I force for that. We'll talk about mistakes and disobedience.
Sure. All right. So everybody who's just listening currently, Pat just threw an orange bumper into the pond. He's got the dog sitting next to him.
Now I'm trying to get him to look at me here. There is sound on this, I think. I was trying to get him to look at me, and I gave the marker to pay him for looking at me. I didn't mean to interrupt, Kevin.
No, you're good. Why did you want him to look at you?
Just because it was I wanted to get him to do something that I'd never asked him to do before.
Cool. All right. So he's like flipping the dog around, asking him to do a couple different tasks, like two-sided healing, basically.
You guys want the audio on for this one?
We're letting it run?
All right.
Yeah.
So there's 3 bumpers on the ground, and I sent him to the table right over top of one of them. Now I'm going to select the long bumper. Ignore the 2 short ones and go get the long one.
That to me is, for an 11-month-old puppy, that's impressive.
So I was able to tell him the first time, ignore all the bumpers and run to the table. Now I picked the long one. Now I selected the short bumper. They're still back to the table. There's still bumpers on the ground. He knows that there's bumpers available, and he wants the bumpers.
Big time.
Now cast and leave all 3 of those and go get the orange bumper that we threw first.
Absolutely. First off, Pat, I would like to commend your mustache in this video. I feel like we need to bring that back.
There you go.
I mean, so this dog puts all of your dogs to shame, Bob. I think that's also worth pointing out.
I think so too, bud. Thanks for pointing it out, everyone.
Don't share that. I'm not even gonna claim that. But so now I'm gonna put that orange one back, and this rascal wants to go. I mean, he's steady here. He's not steady under threat. I think he's pretty happy here. There's no duress involved. I picked out a bumper for him to retrieve. We're gonna throw some more. He's tail wagging. He's popping and cracking.
Yeah, he's level 10 jacked.
And I have not pushed the e-collar button yet. I'll tell you when I do. Now there, I threw the bumper and just sent him for it. I don't want him to learn in this drill, oh, you never go for the ones I retrieve. You only have to do this. You only have to do that. This is not a drill, but just a game. I'm playing a game with some skills that he understands.
Sure. So in essence, it's kind of like you're practicing poison birds. You're practicing asking him to select what you want him to select.
Yeah.
And he's in the highest drive that you really need and want.
Yeah. And he's under control. He's willing to let me direct him.
Mm-hmm. Because when he complies and does what you're asking, he gets what he wants.
Yeah.
There's your fetch.
I pushed the button when he dropped that. When he dropped that, I pushed the button. Now watch the drive state. It didn't suppress anything. He's fully engaged still. He didn't lose any interest. He didn't back out or withdraw from the process. That's pretty tough right there. Threw a bumper right by his head and cast away.
Almost clipped him with it.
Yeah. Now let's take a second. And what if he didn't do what you asked him to do? Besides, he dropped a bumper, but he kind of almost fumbled it. I would agree with putting a little bump on that. That's fine. But let's say you said kennel, and instead of going to kennel, he grabbed that first bumper.
That's difficult enough and complex enough. Then could be some room for some mistake. I could be asking something of him he can't do yet. I would just stop him and I'd go take the bumper from him to tell him no. And I'd put it down and I'd send him onto the table. I wouldn't let him experience the success of doing that.
Yeah.
But to get to there, what I did was I threw those bumpers real wide in the beginning. So there's a bumper at 9 o'clock and I send him to 12 o'clock to get on the table. Then I mark it. Okay. And he runs over and picks it up. So he got to do the retrieve at 9 by going to the table at 12. I call that the indirect path to reward. Excuse me.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
So
One of the
once you learn the
things,
skill, then I made it tougher. I'm sorry. Yep.
no, you're good. So one of the things that I feel like I struggle with a few dogs that look like this guy. I mean, level 10 jacked. They understand sequence of events. So we walk from my truck, totally under control. We walk to the holding blind, totally under control. We walk to the line, totally under control. But it's like that moment of when you pull them out of the holding blind, they can start getting spun up. And they were very good. And then all of a sudden you can just feel it building. And then perfection happens, 80% happens, or they explode and break on a live flyer at a hunt test, right? Like things can happen, but because A plus B equals C, truck to holding blind to line, they've had so many repetitions at it that it's become predictable. Mm-hmm. And so with those dogs, it's similar to what you're saying. I've asked them to do a few different things in order to get what they want, the retrieve, the flyer, the whatever. But I would say I have not done it like to this level, like the control, or maybe just so many repetitions of doing it that way from so many years that I have to almost counterbalance it for a lot longer period of time, maybe.
Well, I used to think, this isn't any reflection on your thinking, but I used to think that I could make a dog something. My training approach was, if they went out of control on the scented point and he didn't cast off the scented point, I'd go home. I'm going to make him do this. I'm going to make him do that, and not stop on the way home. But I mean, when they have an error or a shortcoming in the trial, we need to train to bring that, to fill in that hole, to fill in that gap in their experience and their skill level, to bring that up. But I used to think, I'm going to make him do this. I'm going to make him do that. And I realized that I can't make a dog do anything. It's really kind of freeing for me to understand that. And it was freeing for my dogs. I don't try to make them. So it reduced the frustration in the training for me. And hey, brother, do whatever you want. But I control your access to rewards. And if I consistently control the consequences of his choices, both good and bad consequences, if I just consistently control the consequences, he's going to end up wanting to do what I want him to do. Mm-hmm. Hopefully he would try to break in training if he wants to break on the weekend. As long as my dog makes the mistakes during the week that he makes on the weekend, I'm pretty happy with that,
Yeah.
Because I can control those consequences.
Right.
And if he acts differently on the weekend, I don't run him yet, or I stop running him for a period of time. Agreed. Until I believe the right behaviors become habitual.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I wish. Yeah, no, I think that's great. But I think that the idea of, if he wants the left-hand bumper, he's got to do something else to earn it. You're sending him somewhere else to indefinite, in a certain amount of time, he's going to get what he wants.
And the marker connects it. Mm-hmm. If when we throw a bumper to 9 o'clock, like maybe a poison bird, right? Mm-hmm. And then we send him to the table at 12 o'clock. When he jumps on the table, if you mark it, okay, he gets that explosion of pleasure for going to the table, and he gets a release to go get the bumper there. So now he connects getting the bumper at 9 o'clock with going to the table.
Absolutely.
And you could stop him and send him to another spot to make connections for him, that he's connecting that performance with getting what he wants.
Absolutely. All right. Should we move on to, so this was the end goal. This is a dog who's been collar conditioned, all this stuff. Now we're going to start off with video 1, which Kev, can you pull up, and Pat, can you kind of describe video 1? Well, sure. I guess video 2, excuse me.
Before we do, I want to make one comment on the
Yeah.
animal that was in that first video. I think he was around 11 months when that video was shot. We have some other video of him, but he was sold not too long after this to an intelligence gathering unit in Europe. And he worked, actively worked until he was, I think, 9.5 years old. And he died of cancer 4 or 5 months after he was retired. I mean, he worked almost to the end of his life, happy, engaged, fully long, and working at night in as a surveillance animal, taking directions over radio, wearing a camera, and doing a variety of secret squirrel stuff, and worked a long time.
That's super cool.
Pretty unbelievable. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Again, just pointing it out, much cooler than your dogs, Bob.
Thanks,
That's
bud.
okay, bud. It's all right.
Oh, man,
All
Kennels,
good.
you got to stop. You're hurting me, man. You're hurting me.
All right,
All right,
so
Pat.
this one, Pat, I believe you said does not have audio. So if we want to narrate this or discuss what's going on, like you guys direct me here.
Yeah, I'll let Pat narrate it.
Just to set the stage before we start it, maybe real quick.
Yep.
It does not have a voiceover. One of or two of them, the clips I sent you, the maintenance guy is mowing grass in the background, so I know the video's terrible. The audio is terrible on a couple of them. But this is a young pup. This is Blaze from the pup up, and he's learning collar conditioning here. I have a leash on him because I want to be able to guide the right response. Now, I am asking him to do things he's been rewarded for growing up. He's been rewarded for coming to me. Positive reinforcement with both bumpers and food. He's been rewarded for going to the table, for sitting on the table. But I'm going to put pressure on him. And when I'm putting some very light e-collar pressures on him, I want to make sure I can guide the right response if I need to. So I do my initial collar conditioning on leash, like most of us do. The leash provides directional information with pressure. The collar doesn't provide any directional information. So we tap here, boom, 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 sit, boom, 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 kennel, boom, boom, boom. It all feels exactly the same. And the leash tells him what to do when he feels the pressure. Here we have to get enough repetitions where he does the right thing and it goes away, that he understands and is conditioned to respond appropriately. So he's on leash at this point. He's just learning to turn pressures off. We'll go ahead and start it.
How old is he?
He's not force fetched. He's pretty young here. I'm not sure. I think he's 5.5, 6 months old.
He
Yeah,
looks puppyish.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's between 4 and 6 months old. But
Okay.
I think closer to 6 than 4. Now, he doesn't really know what's going on yet. We can see he's looking around. What's happening? Why am I here?
Yep. So Kev, can you pause real quick? Because this is only a 1.5 minute long video.
Yeah.
So you've already established some collar pressure previously to this session, or this is the first time he's feeling something on his neck?
It's within the first 2 or 3 sessions.
Okay.
I don't know for sure, but it's within the first 2 or 3 sessions.
Okay. So that's early enough. I guess when you said you wanted to be with the leash, you just meant for the directionals and reining him in just in case so you can show him how to turn it off.
Yeah, he doesn't know. He's not collar conditioned yet. And if I
10-4.
put pressure on him, I would only be hoping that he does the right thing.
Agreed. I understand.
don't
I thought
like
you
to
meant
hope-
you did like a couple days of it just on leash without, just sit, just here, just heel. No, this is it. We're rolling.
This is how I start. I teach to come to me, go to the table, and I usually add sit there. And I
Okay.
think we introduce casting and some directional piece here too.
Okay. All right, here we go. So he's sitting on the table. And
Yeah.
will you tell us when we're doing pressure?
Right there, I use pressure on the command to recall, and I had him sit, no pressure. Now I use pressure to go back to the table, and now I put pressure on him for sit right there, and I guide that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just learning how to respond. It's very early. Pressure for here. I gave a reward marker, and I threw the bumper to pay him. So
Yep.
two good things happened when he came when I called him that time. The e-collar stopped and the bumper started.
Yep.
We need the
How,
marker. It's not just stopping and throwing it. It's the marker directly connects it to specific behavior.
that makes sense. When you're collar conditioning, so this is a little dude, like you said, day 1 through 3. Are you using continuous or are you using nick, bump, 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 bump?
I typically bump on the nick. I typically bump on the nick, and there's 3 steps that I want in their collar conditioning. In the first step, I want the dog to learn. I use guidance to teach the behavior that I'm asking for. And I want him to learn, in this situation, coming when I call you turns it off. In this situation, getting on the table turns it off. So I use guidance, and he understands that the activity turns it off. Then as soon as he starts, and I don't use the recall, I don't use pressure till he gets to me. It's just till he starts to me. Because I want him to then learn very quickly that it's the decision to come when he hears when he hear, the decision to come to me turns it off. Sometimes when you call him, they'll start and the pressure goes away, and then he stops to sniff the roses. So I start pressure again. Here, bump, bump, bump. And he says, oh, if I deviate, it starts again. And they come away with understanding that it's not the action, it's not the decision, it's the commitment to do the task that avoids the collar, turns it off and avoids it. And that's what we really want. We need dogs that finish jobs. We don't need dogs that start jobs. You know, there's plenty of them. We need dogs that finish trials, right?
Yeah, that's a great point.
So
I guess another question I have is, usually I try and just tackle one command at a time in the beginning, and then I'll add more so that the dog only has to worry about one thing and is learning one thing. And maybe the fact that I'm even saying the term worry about one thing is the wrong way to put it. Or, just think differently. But I just, like, I'll do here, and we only worry about here. I don't want anybody saying sit or this or that, because now he's thinking, should I sit? Should I go? Should I come? What should I do? Just here. That's all we got to do for this little session. But here you're pairing it with come, go to a dog bed, and sit.
Sit at the table, and sometimes sit then by my side or sit in front. And also, I'm using pressures on the direction, as if you say I had him sit in front of me, and then I gave an arm signal, and he turned to his right and went to the table, not just went to the table when he was looking at it. So I'm giving plenty of guidance that he understands, and the pressures are, I hate to say low, because low is not correct description of the pressure. There was a trainer here in California, Tony Anchetta. I heard him say one time, or I saw it in a chat group. He said, no matter what your collar says, dog could go 0 to 127 on some of their units. No matter what your collar says, there's only 3 settings. It's the Goldilocks principle. This not enough, too much, and just right. And if it's not enough pressure, he's putting up with it. He's not responding to it. He's responding in spite of it. So maybe he's coming when you call him because he's on leash, but he's not really responding to the collar. So that's not enough pressure. If I'm putting pressure on him and he's getting rattled, or his drive state, his excitement for the activity is going down, I believe it's too much pressure. And if I find that sweet spot, the pressure motivates behavior, but he's still in that predatory drive to make good things happen. Under stress, they won't take food treats. Some dogs, you put them under some stress and they won't even take a food treat from your hand because, the survival is kicking in. He says, oh, I have to avoid danger. I can't be worried about that. I got to avoid this dangerous thing. And again, I'm not saying danger, but at the genetic encoding in his brain, seek safety and seek retrieves, find a pack and reproduce. These real deep genetic things in the brain. So Yeah. There's enough guidance, I believe, that he understands what I'm asking of him.
And enough foundation of teaching before you do it. So this puppy has had enough place training, enough coming when called to be rewarded, enough sitting and then being rewarded, that he understands what's being asked of him. And now it's being overlaid with the collar.
Yes, that's true. If someone sent, again, I don't take dogs in for training professionally. I'm an amateur. I consult for military units, but I don't take dogs in for training anymore. But if somebody sent me a 6-month-old dog for training, the second or third day I had the dog, I would be doing very similar to what you see with that pup there. I'd reward him a couple of times for going to the table, and then I'd start adding pressure.
Interesting.
A couple of times. Pardon?
Yeah, I said that's interesting. I would have thought that you would give him a little bit more time to learn some stuff. No, it was rock and roll, baby.
We'd be teaching it. It's because it's the game. He's in drive. It's prey. He's chasing, and we'd be moving forward.
Very good. All right, I do have some. There's just things that make me say, like, like, I agree. If I did this with 80% of the dogs in the kennel, I feel like I would motivate them with that bumper, rock and roll. But then that 20% that probably, like you said, should have just been a pet, I can't.
Or do those dogs, quote unquote, wash out, Pat? Like, so those dogs wouldn't make the military squad or like whatever it might be.
For sure. If he doesn't want to retrieve and if you can't motivate him with the retrieve or a tug, the military unit wouldn't own him.
Right.
They don't, most of the units that I work with don't raise their own dogs. They buy adult trained dogs to go out and test them. And so if he's not interested in retrieving or biting, chasing, and thanks, show us another one, they wouldn't take that one home.
But like you've done this before with the retrievers. I mean, there are some times where we don't have that option to wash them out because it's this person's only dog and his kids love it. And he can't have 2 dogs in the house and and you have to make I always say you can't make a filet mignon out of a shit sandwich.
Yeah.
But I do the best I can to make that shit sandwich palatable.
Well, and I've been
excuse my language.
Silk purse sow's ear syndrome. You're trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Can't do it. But here's I think there we have one of 2 things: to have a honest conversation with our owner, and I'm not suggesting, I'm just saying, not that you don't. I'm sure you do. Yeah. We have to sit down and say, hey, we need to look at realistic expectations for your dog. I don't believe I can make a field champion with your dog. Or, I think we can, with some luck, we're going to get a junior hunter if you want. But I don't think that the Master National Hall of Fame is going to be in this dog's future. Now, as long as we both understand what I think are reasonable objectives and they want to continue on. I've trained dogs, that, you do the best you can.
Yeah.
And sometimes they surprise you.
And that's what I was going to say. Sometimes they do blossom later on and mature later on, and you're thankful that you didn't give up. But I can think of one in the kennel right now that it is hard to train her and drive like you are showing in these videos. When she feels the fight or flight, she has no guts to go and have fun. And so what I'm hoping is the light bulb, because when it's all fun and games, she's piss and vinegar. But as soon as there's some nervy, like I know she wasn't properly socialized as a puppy. I know that there were things that she didn't get to help me help her. But as soon as there's like any ounce of, oh my goodness, that drive comes down big time. And I've got to just pull and pull.
Yeah. I'm not going to suggest that a training technique will make something of a dog that isn't there. But
Okay.
but I do believe that when we train and drive, we can get more out of the individual animal.
Mhm.
And maybe we are closer to maximizing the genetic potential of this individual animal. Uh, it is, this is just to backtrack just a little bit, but when I first collar conditioned the very first session, I find that right setting, that sweet spot. They're on that leash, and I just bump it up, and he's free, loose, sniffing around, and I bump and tap and bump and tap and bump and tap and I'm asking the question, "Can you feel that?" I'm not saying the words, but I'm asking him a question. Can you feel that? Can you feel that? When he says, "Hey, I felt that. What was that?" then I'm going to use that to teach him. Now I put that little pressure on him and the leash, and I teach him bump, bump, bump. And as soon as he takes one step, and I guide that step with the leash, as soon as he takes one step, I stop tapping. And I don't teach a command. I just teach him, when you move, it goes away. When you move, it goes away. And I do that 4 or 5 times with the dog. When you move, it goes away. And then I just start showing him different ways to make it go away. I
Cool.
wanted him to know he's in charge of that.
Before we jump into the next video, the last question I have on that first one. So again, that was that puppy's maybe second or third session at it. Very good attitude. If you didn't tell me you pushed the button, you wouldn't have known you pushed a button. That's what we ultimately all want. A happy, great looking, motivated dog complying with commands, and turning that pressure off quickly. What I noticed is after maybe 2 reps of everything. So here, a sit, a kennel, a here, a sit, a kennel. You gave the okay, toss him a bumper. That video we saw is only a minute and a half long. How long are your sessions, and how often are you using the retrieve and the okay, your marker, to reward
Yes,
that dog to keep
good
the
question.
training and drive?
The length of the session depends on the kind of the age of the dog, the temperature, and all like that. I want the dog playing, actively pursuing. So most of them, if I look back, most of my clips are in the 5 to 7 minute length where the dog is, actively pursuing. And that's in the beginning, I pushed a button on every single command. And in the beginning, I'm rewarding pretty much every single command. So he goes on the table, I pay him with a treat. He goes on the table, I pay him with a treat. He goes on the table, I throw the bumper. And then I start to go variable. So he doesn't get paid every single time. When we're doing those table games, I'm asking different things of him. Come to me, sit by my side or sit in front, sit on the table. And then I start adding other tables, as we'll see. I want to make sure that I'm distributing the reward on all of those things as much as each one needs. When he's learning a new thing, I have to put more reward on that. Something he's been doing for a little while, I don't have to pay as often. But my goal is to pay at a very high frequency so he has an expectation that every key pops, he comes, he says, "Are you going to pay me now?" And when he has that expectation, then I start asking for more work before I pay. So I increase the time between the reinforcement. So he has to work harder and harder.
And stays motivated to get it.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. You ready for the next one?
Oh, one more comment. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Go for it.
In the first video, I introduced casting left and right to go to that table. And you said about confusion. When I first start casting him sideways, like in front, and I'm going to send him sideways, I don't do that with 2 tables the first time or 2, because then he has to make a decision, which way do I go? But if I cast left and right and there's only 1 table, I know which way he's going to go. He knows where he has to go. Once he can do it, then we go to 2 tables. Here's 2
Very
tables.
good. All right. So we've got the 2 tables. Is this the same dog, Blaze?
Same dog, and just a little bit down the road, but I mean, it's on the same piece of property, so it's not
Sure.
down the road, but he's a little bit older, a week
Very
or 2,
good.
or.
Here we go. We've got video 3. 2 tables now. And Pat, you continue narrating for us.
He jumped off the table there. I want to talk about that in a second. We want to make sure we talk about that, but we're going to watch this for a minute. Now he's doing directionals, left and right overs. See that expectation? He's got a pretty high expectation going there that he ran over top of that table when he didn't have to.
Okay.
Going to the table has become reinforcing. And I want to talk about what I did when he jumped off in just a moment, but we'll keep it moving.
Okay. Very good.
I think we're working on hold at this level. Again, he came off the table before I told him. I didn't punish him. I forced for the desired behavior. He broke a stay in a sense. He came off. I didn't punish coming off. I put pressure on Kennel, send him back to the table. If we don't like what the dog is doing, we have 2 ways to change it. I mean, we can use positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement to make it more likely to do the right thing. But if we don't like what he's doing, we can punish the wrong thing, or we can reinforce and make the right thing more likely. I always prefer to force for the desired behavior rather than punishing for undesirable behavior. They do have to understand punishment. Now, stop that for 1 second for me, Kevin. They do have to understand punishment, but 95% of the time I pushed a button with an e-collar, it's to do something. It's not to stop that. We do use the collar indirect pressure for cast refusals, but 95% of the time I pushed a button, I'm pushing for something I want rather than punishing something I don't want.
Let's dive into that, because I understand what you're saying, but maybe not everybody would. So
yeah, can we like slow that down?
Someone would think that the fact that you push the button is the punishment, and you use the term forced. So let's dive into that. Like, they are probably saying, well, isn't that the same thing to the dog?
We'll talk about it. The one basic premise of the electronic collar is whatever the dog is doing when pressure stops is reinforced. That's negative reinforcement. Whatever he's doing when pressure stops, again, that primitive brain logs that away and says, in this situation, I can turn that pressure off by doing X. Now, when it stops is more important than when it starts. When the collar stops is more important than when it starts. We have to be careful when we start it, and we want to make sure that in here, while he's being conditioned to do the right things, it's not very high to be unpleasant for him. But if we look and compare the dog in this video, who's just a week or 2 later than the dog in that first video, he is more excited about this process. He's paying more attention because these things lead to the bumper. Right. These things lead to, again, safety. And obviously he's not scared. So no. I'm talking about deep genetic programming to seek comfort, which is processed as safety for the animal. So if I'm sending the dog for a long channel swim later on, trained dog, I send him for a long channel swim to a mark. He says, I'm halfway there. That's good enough. Let me get out. And he's a land mammal. It's faster to go by land. He understands that. So it's a logical thing for him to do. If I don't like him getting out halfway, I can punish for getting out. Kind of an old hotspot theory, get out, no, burp, and make it unpleasant for getting out. I can cast him to tell him to stay in, and then I can correct if he doesn't take my cast, or, which are both correcting for things I don't want, or he tries to get out, I can cast him, and then I can force to swim. And I pre-plan that with my guns, my throwers. if I'm likely to get a cheat, I tell them, when you hear me handle, when I say back, you step up and yell and throw a bumper. So now I put pressure on him, back, bump, 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 and I'm forcing, and he sees the visible target, so he knows exactly where to go. So I'm forcing for stay in the water. I'm forcing for swim to the end, which is making it more likely that he'll make the swim. And if he's more likely to make the swim, he can't get out at the wrong spot, any of the wrong spots along the way.
Makes sense.
And when I say that, if we watch that dog, he's more engaged, he's excited, he's popping and going faster and harder. That's the definition of reinforcement.
Let's watch that video again, because it's
Yeah.
only a minute and a half long. And I want you to time or explain to folks who are lucky enough to be watching on YouTube to when the pressure comes on. So in the first 5 seconds, he pops off. I'm assuming that's when you're applying bump, 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 bump.
Bump, bump, bump. You see me raise my hand there? I have a transmitter in my hand, and I forced to go back. But look, he's not shook up. He's not afraid of the table.
Right.
There he didn't sit. I pushed a button again for the sit. I'm forcing to go to the table. I'm forcing on the recall, force for the sit. Okay. And
now
throw
a fun
it.
bumper. Yep.
But not just a fun bumper. It's marked first and then thrown. So it directly connects it with that recall or with the sit.
Very
again,
good.
He pops off the table again. I put the bumper in his mouth there. I guess we're working on hold.
He's off, bump, bump.
Force, bump, bump to get back up. And it's making the desired, he's gacking there. It got grass or something from the bumper, but
did you force to hear on that one?
yes. Yeah. Marking. Now, stop that for 1 second real quick. When he picked that bumper up, he went out of his way to jump up on the table.
Right.
He already had the bumper in his mouth. So if the only reason he was going to the table was to get the bumper, he wouldn't go to the table because he had it. If the only reason to get to the table was to stop pressure, he wouldn't jump on the table because I'm not forcing to the table. But he had the bumper and he went out of his way to go jump on the table, which says to me that I have made going to the table rewarding or enjoyable to the dog.
Yep. Makes sense. All right, go ahead and hit play.
They went before I told him. I just called him back with a little recall, boom, boom. And now I think I may force, I just paid it. So he broke, went to the table. I forced him to come back, bump, bump. He came back and then I marked and paid it. Now I'm forcing for an over. Now I think I forced on a back here. So.
And okay, marked it and sent it. Yep.
Now, when I start stopping dogs on the way to the table, there's at least 3 things they do that I don't like. Every one of them at some point in time. Some dogs will no-go when you get them to stop on the way to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Some dogs will pop. They run out and anticipate. So, oh, you're going to stop me? Now maybe this is when you're going to stop me. And then some dogs go slow or peek. They look over their shoulder. If we condition to leave our side, to turn pressure off, if we condition to turn around and go behind them when they're seated in front, if we condition force in route, we can clean all of those 3 inappropriate responses up pretty quickly when we teach them to stop on the way to the pile or on the way to the table, or when we can get it in the tee. But we can start conditioning those responses really from the first or second session of collar conditioning. We can force to the table and still pay for it. I can't force to a pile because unless he's force fetched, I've had the dog go to a pile and just stand there and not pick up. They say, I went away, but they won't pick up. So I never force to the pile until the dog is force trained to retrieve.
Oh, agreed. Do you ever have miscommunication or missteps or the correlation between This dog is crushing it at doing all the handling on the tables. We basically, in the next video, I believe we have 3 tables and we're doing basically T pattern with tables. Do you have, and then I understand that we're not, the dog has to be force fetched to then actually go to the T. But that transition period where tables are now gone and it's just piles of bumpers, is there any consistency in, boy, it usually takes them a few days to put 2 and 2 together again, or you find it's pretty dang seamless?
It's pretty seamless because they're getting a tremendous amount of retrieve through all this.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, when I start a T, I always mark the pile. So in the event that the reason I mark the pile, in the event that I have to force for something, I want him to know exactly where the pile is. I want him to know how to get out of trouble. So even if I'm doing double T, I start off by marking the pile first, say, hey, here's where we're going. And it is just a seamless transition. What we're actually doing is forcing for the behavior, go away, go here, go there. Now, if you took the tables away and they didn't have targets, like a pile of bumpers, they wouldn't necessarily, or they might go a few feet and then, oh, where do I go? But it's seamless to go from the tables to the piles of bumpers.
But realistically, it's probably seamless because you're establishing the pile, which is great.
Yeah, I always mark the pile, and sometimes when I cast for an over, the dog doesn't know where it is. I give him 2 or 3 chances, and then I mark the pile and send him, and then we don't have to do it. Talking about miscommunications and misunderstandings, there's a big overriding rule I have in training is if the dog makes a mistake, I cannot correct him. If the dog is disobedient, I must take some kind of corrective action. Now, by mistake, I mean he's trying the best he can and comes up with the wrong answer. If we give a discrimination problem, we step out and talk about science, a science experiment just for a minute. I forget which animals were involved, but they had an animal, I think it was a rat, and they took a sign on the wall was a circle. And then over here was an oblong. And whenever they went to the oblong, I forget the details, but the big picture is correct, okay? So I might be wrong on which shape they were using. But they were rewarding the rat when he went to the circle, and they corrected or punished him when he went over here to the oblong. So very quickly, he just stayed away from the oblong, and he went to the circle. You put him in a cage, you go to the circle and get paid. Now, once he understood that, I get punished at the oblong, I get rewarded at the circle. They start stretching the circle out a little bit every session, and they start compressing the oblong closer and closer. So the oblong becomes to look more and more like a circle, and the circle looks more and more like the oblong. At some point, he can't discriminate. He can't tell where he's going to get paid and where he's going to get corrected. And it's very disruptive. They like freak out. They kind of have a little nervous breakdown. Kind of, you don't know, am I going to get kicked, or, am I going to get shocked, or am I going to get fed? That's pretty stressful for a little rat. Stressful for us. You go to a place of business. Am I going to get punched in the nose, or am I going to get a sandwich? I wouldn't go back. So if we ask a discrimination problem of our dog in training, we put the poison bird closer to the blind than he can actually do. And he might not understand where we're sending him. Or the marks are so tight, they're converging marks, and he can't really tell. He's done one over here, one over there, and he comes back, and you're sending him for that long one up the center. He can't really tell where we're sending him, and he makes a mistake. He's doing the best he can to come up with the birds, and he goes back to an old fall, and he gets punished for that, for making a mistake. Now, it could be a disobedience, but I'm saying this dog makes a mistake. We can't correct for mistakes. And they're going to make mistakes. They can't not make mistakes. Mm-hmm. I've made several since the podcast started. I can't not make mistakes. But if I say, come here, let's we throw a poison bird, and I say, come here, jump over this log. And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. And he runs for the poison bird. That may be a disobedience depending on the dog's level of training. Sure. And then I need to take some corrective action. I may call him back with pressure here, boom, boom, boom. He comes back. Let's try that again. Go this way. So we can't correct for mistakes. We have to correct for disobedience. That way we have a dog that's fully engaged in training and trying, and he's still reliable.
Yeah.
We don't want just reliable. We want just in drop.
I think a lot of what you're saying makes me reflect on corrections that I've made that were unfair. And I think if anybody is being honest with themselves sitting here listening to this or watching this, they're going to say, boy, I could have done this differently, or the way before I jump the gun and get frustrated with the dog, or how the setup is going or whatever. Is he trying hard and screwing up, or is he being disobedient? And I think that your point needs to, before you get out of the truck and take your dog out of the truck, you need to think about what he just said.
Hey, I wish I could train some of my earlier dogs over again. There have been times when I used pressure because I could, not necessarily because of what was needed. And the better I can communicate to the animal, the clearer I can make the picture, the better I can connect to retrieve with the things I'm asking him to do, the less pressure I really need to get the job done. That's the way it's worked for me.
Do you ever find that training and drive can make them into too much of a crackhead? This is a total sidebar that just came out of nowhere, where it's like, are there certain dogs that it's just spins them out too much?
If you're starting with a dog that has already got some history of squirting out, and they're already in a real hyper state, even that animal, if I can connect the retrieve, he's crazy. I get out of the way. I want to retrieve. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. If I can show him that I have what you want, I want you to have it, you can channel that easier. There is again, a science aside, Bernstein's matching law. There's a researcher named Bernstein, and he did some studies on reinforcements. So they, let's imagine that you're trying to teach a dog, and most of his stuff was with pigeons and rats, but his matching law says when the animal has multiple behaviors available to them, they distribute their effort in direct proportion to reinforcement history. So if I'm trying to teach the dog to put his chin right here, the center of his chin right there, I don't know why I'd want to teach a dog that, but if I was trying to teach that, and sometimes he puts the chin there, and I say, if I don't like it, if I punish him, hey, don't do that. He's not likely to come put his chin here. He said, well, let me just stay out of that way. So, we're not going to punish him. I use a no reward marker. I say, no, which means you won't get paid doing that. It doesn't mean I'm going to punish you. It just means you won't get paid doing that. So he tries something else. He puts his chin over here. No. And so go here. Okay, now I pay that. So, well, that's close enough to the center.
Mm-hmm.
He does have his chin there. It's close enough to the center. Then the next time he puts this side of the chin, still off center, but close enough to the center, and I pay that. Now he puts 3 here, 3 there, and we'll say 4. It's right here on the center. So if we look at that in the big picture now, when I come back to train the next time, I only have a 40% chance that he's going to do what I really want, because he distributes his effort in direct proportion to reinforcement history. I've paid 3 times for this, 3 times for that, and 4 times for the chin right on the center. I have a 40% chance he's going to be here. So we have to consistently control the consequences. If we can channel that drive, not break the drive or not stop that drive, but channel the drive. You travel the highway a lot, and I know you're watching birds, and you're wandering. I wander off the road looking for ponds, and I see, there's a hawk there. You ever seen a hawk sitting in a dead tree, and they're perfectly still leaning over and maybe staring at something? You know, when he's leaning over, he's staring at something and he's perfectly still. That bird is 100% engaged in hunting because he knows, I mean, for him, it is life or death.
Mhm.
If I don't kill this thing, I'm going to die. And maybe not, he has tried another one later and he doesn't die immediately, but he knows my survival depends on killing something here. So he's 100% in drive, but he's not jumping up and down and flashing and chasing. He's perfectly still because being still kills more. Biding his time, waiting. So if we can teach the dog, you retrieve more when you sit still. You know, if we can make that connection for him, he can put all that energy, boom, locking up because, man, I'm going to get those, but I got to bide my time. So but yes, I don't do, yes, there are some things. I don't do healing to the line in drive because I don't want him jacked up. I want him nice and calm and clear headed. And I don't elicit the drive behavior there. I just want him subdued, a little more subdued. Because the drive is, he's already in drive. I don't have to add anything there. He knows this leads to retrieving. The only reason we come out of the truck and go that way is to retrieve. So he's already in a drive state. I don't need to add anything there.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. All right. Should we jump into the next video? This is, I believe, our last video. Or do we have one more?
One more after this.
Okay, cool. All right. So we've got 3 tables.
Mm-hmm.
Is this still Blaze?
This is Blaze. A couple weeks later, maybe a month later than the first one, or 2 months. He didn't sit. I did bump him. He did sit.
Yep.
Now, we ask for more behavior before I pay him. You know, there's more reps in between, but look at the dog. Every single time he pops, is he going to pay me now? Is he going to pay me now? And there, I didn't make him sit. I marked as soon as he hit the table. He wasn't disobedient for not sitting. I didn't tell him to sit. I gave the mark. Here, I'm handling on the return.
So one thing I'll clarify, pause it real quick, Kev. You use the word pop, but for someone who's not watching this, I don't want him to think pop is in he stops momentum and looks at you as if a pop on a retrieve. What he means, he's popping like he's fired up. He's like, you know, spunky. He's jacked. And
cracking. I'd say here, and he runs in, locks up and stares at you. Are you going to pay me now? You send him to the table. He runs over and whips around. Are you going to pay me now? Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead, Kev. Are you, all of this is still with collar, right?
E-collar. My wife asked me if we had the audio going. My wife is there with a client of hers, and he didn't quite sit down fully for me. That Hertzstein's matching law. He was crouching there. He didn't have his butt on the ground. That was working against me. But look at this handling on a return. He's not even, that bleeds right into the swim by. And we use the tables teaching swim by. They understand handling to the table. My wife asked me at the end, you know, tell me when you're pushing the button. And this isn't the end of the session. I said, I pushed a button every time I sent him to the table. Every time I called him, we're forcing on back. Every time I had him sit.
Do you ever do in route force on these?
I do. Yes.
So it's, you know, back, bump, bump, bump. So is it like back, neck, back?
Actually, I don't always say back after I nick. There's, I guess there's a reason that's historically what people do. We say back, nick, back. But really, again, Ivan Pavlov, they were messing around. We try this, try that. There's no backwards conditioning in most training situations with the animal. So we ring the bell and bring the food. He learns to salivate 10, 15 times when you ring the bell. In 10 or 15 repetitions, he'll be salivating. But if you give him the food and then ring the bell, you can do that 300 or 400 times, and they never salivate when you ring the bell. If you ring the bell while he's already eating, because there's no backwards conditioning, it can only predict. So if I'm trying to, at some level, I mean, back, nick, back, to make sure that he knows what to do with that pressure, but I don't think it's really necessary.
Okay.
And I do go, once they're at the level that he's there, I'm going to start going to I'm going to go to variable ratio. I don't push the button on every command. I always push it for disobedience to command, repeat the command and push the button. But I'm start going variable ratio. So I might force on the go, or back, and I might force don't force on the back. I might force in route. Sometimes I might not force at all, but in this little video clip, I was pushing it for every command.
Very good. Sometimes when they're figuring out that en route force, and again, I'm using the term they're figuring it out because it typically irons itself out with practice. But the first time they do it or feel the en route, they may stop. They may look back at you like, well, what the heck did you do that for? You know, it didn't continue motivating them, if that makes sense. How do you handle that situation?
Well, one would be I'd make sure that he was really in pursuit of something at the other end. And when the pressures are a little lower, you don't, if it's not a disruptive pressure, it's a pressure that he can process. You don't see it as often. And if he did, then I just repeat the command back and I just get him moving and then force and route again.
Okay. Yeah, same. Very good. And maybe in some of the instances, the pressure was, even though I didn't think it was disruptive, to him it was. You know what I mean?
It disrupted the obedience to your last command. So it was a tiny bit disrupted.
Yep. Very good.
We do have one more we could look at. And
we do. It's a minute long here, and I do believe there is some audio to it. Do you want to kill the audio and narrate it yourself, or do we want to? I feel like it kind of goes better if we narrate it ourselves like this
live. Yeah. I do too.
Yeah. I'll give some background. I was teaching a seminar at my wife's training building in South Carolina. And you can see some paraphernalia on the table there. It was a detection seminar. And when the dogs would come up in the morning, this is after a lunch break, they'd come up and I'd say, do you use, I'd ask everybody, do you use a reward marker? Oh, yeah. What's your reward marker? Yes, or Fred, or okay. So they tell me. And then when the dog was doing their little search pattern, when they would find the right stuff, or even if they didn't know it was the right stuff, when they put their nose where they could smell the odor that we're trying to make important to them, the handlers would say their reward marker, and there would be no change in the dog at all. And so it happened with handler after handler after handler. And I knew that they didn't understand what I meant when I said a reward marker. Because if you give the reward marker, the dog will respond with almost the same explosion that they do when you give them the reward that you're using to teach the reward marker. And so and then some of the people in the crowd were anti-e-collar. And so I wanted to make a little point about that. I get the collar out and she's dancing for me to put the collar on. And I say, oh, you can see she's really frightened. And
that's awesome.
And then I have her do some things and I say, yeah, you don't have to mark everything she does, but you have to pay everything you mark. So there she's jumping up for me to put the collar on her. I said, oh, you can see she's really scared. And now I have her do some things. I say, you don't have to pay everything she does, but you have to pay everything you mark. Down, sit, turn, down, sit, look, walk, down, sit, back up. Whoop. We had a glitch there, but she backs up on command and then freezes. And that little jump at the end where she jumped around, I gave the reward marker, she jumped around. Oh, he's going to pay me now.
Yep.
The dog is working in drive.
That's super cool.
Powerful, obedient responses in drive and both under control and in drive. During
that little talk, were you doing any collar pressure to it? Or was that dog just so good it was?
No collar pressure. It was just, she had been conditioned for all those things before, but she was wearing the collar and I didn't push the button for anything.
That's super cool.
So for
That's my desired. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I for this type of for the dog that we're just looking at, uh that was not something that you would use for field trials and like those types of commands. Not something for field trials and hunt tests and going out hunting with your buddies and things like that with your lab. What would a job be like for a dog like that?
She was trained as a surveillance dog, so she was trained to take radio directionals and to wear a camera. And you could turn her, you'd say left, and she would look to the left, or right, and she would look to the right. And then you could direct her around out of sight. Sometimes we'd put a drone up and I'd watch the drone feed and talk to her on the radio. And sometimes she would be inside a building and be wearing a camera and I could talk her around. She could place things on targets at a distance,
That's
or
wild.
retrieve things.
How old was that dog?
Let's see. I'm guessing she was 5 in there or 6. She's still alive now. She's 13 and a half.
No way.
She's been a great animal for me.
That's pretty
Wonderful
cool.
dog. It's a 4th generation, 5th generation of my that I've trained to bitches in that process, in that bloodline, but the 4th generation of my breeding. My wife is running her daughter now. Her daughter has an obedience trial championship. I don't know if I said this before. If I did, you can clean it up in post, cut it out.
No,
But
you're
her
good.
daughter is running obedience. She has an obedience trial championship. She just took 2nd place in a big national competition in the obedience ring. She worked for us in a COVID detection project that was funded by the Department of Defense and worked in conjunction with Penn State. And so she could detect COVID from someone's urine, from their saliva, or from a shirt that they had worn.
Interesting.
And she is qualified for this year's National Amateur Championship. So I mean,
No
she's
way.
good in many different things. Yeah.
Multifaceted. What is her lineage? Who's, you said it's like 5 generations of your lines. Who are the parents and grandparents that maybe we'd recognize?
Well, the Rebel Ridge Cody's Mischief, 200 all age points. Mac's Surprise is back there, which is lean Mac. Cody's got a lean grade. So they were all nice working bitches from working bloodlines, bred to top producing sires, and the breedings all worked. This dog that you saw there, her mother was the first camera dog I trained, camera guidance dog I trained. And then so there's 3 there in a row, and I trained their mother, which was a Max Surprise bitch. So they're nice animals, and they've been good to me.
That's
Good
really
for you.
cool.
That's
Can I
really
can I ask
special.
like a I don't even know what kind of a question, but why not a robot to do
These things?
something like that, right? Like why not have a robot that you can direct like a video game? And
they do use robots sometimes. The dog is more versatile. They can jump up on things, climb over things, go under things. The robots, that they aren't very fast. They can't do those things quickly. Many of them don't handle stairs well, and the dog is actively pursuing targets. So the robot does exactly what you tell it. The dog is doing what you tell it, but it's also then pursuing, looking for things. So they do work in conjunction. Sometimes the dogs deliver a robot to do some sampling. You can use the radio guidance in a camera to direct the dog in to search an explosive package at a distance. And they're faster at the detection process than a robot.
That's wild. Oh,
you do some cool stuff, Pat.
you do some cool stuff, man. You are the cat's pajamas at this. Like,
well,
it's unbelievable to watch the dogs training and drive, because they're having fun. They're processing quickly. They're problem solving quickly and succeeding. And I mean, I think everybody, one of my favorite compliments that I typically get, but I can't say that every dog is like this, but I typically get, boy, your dogs look so happy to work for you.
There
And
you
that's
go.
like that's the best compliment any of us can get. But I also can look in the mirror and say, sometimes they didn't look that way, or there's a dog in the kennel now that doesn't look that way. And I'm just begging and borrowing and stealing to get her to love me and love it, you know?
I think if you're a caring human, we all wonder, how could I do this better? I wish I, we can't go back, but going forward, how could I do this better? How could I have done that better? Self-reflection and improvement.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. There's so many more things, but we've had a great episode with you. It just means we've got to do another one. So we got,
I'd like that.
I did really enjoy your company. I hope we can do it in person sometime, but thank you so much. If you could give yourself a plug for the online resources that you have again, tell people where they can find you and your courses.
The easiest way, we're changing some websites now, but probably the easiest way to get to my online courses is to go to patnolan.com. And we're changing that whole website over, but you can get there and find the links to my online courses. We have an e-collar conditioning course, and we are updating that to include the retriever training conditioning. The first one is more just the basic getting dogs started on a collar. The next one's going to include more of the field uses and preparation for the field. But patnolan.com, patnolan.com.
Very good, Pat. Well, everybody who tuned in, thank you so much. It's going to take some figuring out to get this bad boy on YouTube, but when it hits, you can find the video of us describing Pat's videos on the YouTube channel, loneduckoutfitters.com. Thank you all for another, everybody's attention span is pulled in 8,000 directions. So the fact that you chose to sit here and listen to us, we really appreciate you very much. Pat, thank you very much for your time. Good luck at your conference. Have fun. And I look forward to doing this again.
Thank you for having me back. I really enjoy it. And I do hope we get to train together in person. And, I am very grateful to the owners that supported me, paid, that we trained for, and grateful to the dogs that have taught me and worked so hard for me. And I'm grateful to my family that supports me, and to you all for having me out. Thank you.
Absolutely, Pat. Thank you again. Everybody, thanks again for tuning in.